I'm not going to do a testing segment on every episode of the mutations because it's all basically the same testing. If there's any kind of like different test, then I will add it to the segment, but if not, then this is the only testing segment. And it's going to be the same for treatments because as far as I could tell, they're all, like, a lot of the medications are the same. So I didn't want to have to repeat what it was. And I'm going to do the treatments after, just to add a little bit of better flow, I guess. Testing for MPNs. According to the Mayo Clinic, a complete blood count, or CBC, is used to check your overall health and blood disorders. A CBC checks your red blood cell, white blood cell, platelets, hematocrit, hemoglobin, medication side effects, vitamin levels, and much more. Most MPN diagnoses are first noticed by CBC. After your diagnosis, you will have a CBC before every appointment to track how your illness is progressing. The next test that is typically a bone marrow biopsy, or BMB. BMB is often related to two tests, which are the bone marrow aspiration and the actual bone marrow biopsy. My doctor, or the place that I go to, they do both at the same time. So I just lump them as just a bone marrow biopsy. So a bone marrow biopsy is when the sample contains some solid parts. So it's like the marrow and like some of the bone, I guess. And then a bone marrow aspiration is when only fluid is taken as a sample. Typically the hip bone is used. Similar to CBCs, you will have multiple BMBs after your diagnosis. And I will say, if you haven't listened to any of my medical updates, but they have changed a lot in the last 7 or so years, because I got my first one in 2014, and then my next one was in last year in 2021. And the 2014 one was not pleasant. I was awake for it, and it was incredibly painful and traumatizing and very scary. And like, I probably injured the nurse's hand because it hurt so much that I was just squeezing her hand so hard. But with this last one, I went to sleep. They did it on my back. They didn't do it like on the side of the hip. And there was little to no pain, which was so surprising. Because, like, we actually, I think we might have, like, even, like, moved our schedule around just to make sure that we had time for me to recover. And the recovery was so easy that my kids basically had some days off from therapy. So, but, I mean, it was I was going to say fun, but it wasn't fun, but it was better than last time. Okay, so after you have the CBC and you have the BMB, you'll have a genetic testing, which is done to check for any mutations to help narrow down the exact cause of your illness and help to decide treatment. In recent years, medications targeting specific mutations have allowed for better treatment. These tests can also show if the person has an idiopathic MPN in which no genetic mutations are found, but all the other hallmarks are met. The link to Columbia has a list of all of the genes tested, and I had only heard of like a few of the genes listed, and when I saw the list, I knew I had to include it in the show notes so that everyone can see and realize just how many genes are involved in MPNs. The Calr mutation. It's the second most common mutation after JAK2. It's acquired after birth. The gene is responsible for making calreticulin protein, whose functions are largely unknown but thought to be involved in the correct folding of new proteins, maintaining correct calcium levels in cells, and several other cell functions. So it's fairly integral in cells and their processes, but it's still not like fully understood how it's involved in those processes, is from my understanding. And then the MPNs affected are ET with 20 to 25% of adult patients, and PMF with about 25 to 30% of adult patients. In pediatric PMF patients, about 50% had the CALR mutation. Signs and symptoms of possible CALR include enlarged spleen, which is splenomegaly, and liver, or hepatomegaly, and abdominal pain, excessive clotting, which is clots in veins or arteries, easy bruising and bleeding, headache, vision problems, dizziness, also signs and symptoms of anemia. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily have the CALR mutation or an MPN. You could just have anemia if you only have like those symptoms and none of the other symptoms linked to CALR. JAK2. Janus Kinase 2 is a non-receptor tyrosine kinase. It is part of the JAK-STAT pathway, which transmits signals from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell. I'll break that down into a less inducing explanation. So what is kinase? It's a protein that speeds up the chemical reactions in the body by adding phosphates to other molecules. The molecules then either become active or inactive. What is ATP? Adenosine triphosphate is a nucleotide consisting of three main structures: the nitrogenous base, the sugar ribose, and a chain of three phosphate groups fused. It captures chemical energy obtained from the breakdown of food molecules in the three bound phosphates, and the energy is released to fuel other cellular processes. JAK2 and other pseudokinases bind ATP, but mutations occur. The normal binding of ATP is interrupted. What is tyrosine kinase? An enzyme that can transfer a phosphate group from ATP to the tyrosine residues of specific proteins inside a cell. And it works as an on-off switch for many cellular functions. What is the normal function? The normal function provides instructions for making a protein that promotes the growth and division or proliferation of cells. JAK2 works with the stem cell's bone marrow to trigger the production of white blood cells, platelets, and red cells. Abnormal function. JAK2 mutations are common in ET, PV, and PMF due to how JAK2 is meant to work. The mutation is the cause of the proliferation, with the differences being what type of blood stem cell is being directly affected. There have been over 50 mutations involving JAK2 identified. How it works. Polycythemia vera is too many red blood cells are made. Essential thrombocythemia, too many megakaryocytes or platelet-producing cells are made. Primary myelofibrosis, chronic idiopathic myelofibrosis, or agnogenic myeloid metaplasia is where too many platelet-producing cells and cells that produce scar tissue in the bone marrow. JAK2 V617F test. The test was used to identify JAK2 mutations named after a JAK2 point mutation. The JAK2-V617F is acquired instead of inherited. The resulting mutation is located in a single DNA nucleotide base pair. The abbreviated V and F stand for the amino acid valine, and I'm going to attempt to do this, or I might end up spelling it out. Phenylalanine. Phenylalanine, respectively. Valines are branched amino acids, and the change in valines is the mutation that causes the blood stem cells to be on and constant, uncontrolled cell production. Okay, positive and negative. According to what information I was able to find, the difference between JAK2 positive and JAK2 negative is that the amount of mutated cells is too small to be detected on the JAK2 test. The JAK2 negative could also mean that there is a mutation of the JAK2, but it doesn't show up in the results of the JAK2 tests. If listeners can provide articles or websites that better explain the differences, any and all information would be appreciated.